community-based, its intent is for community-based treatment services, so it would be separate from clinic and not held to 599 regulations. And for OMH, we will be issuing further guidance as to what exactly this means and spell that out for providers. So be on the lookout for that as well. Okay. So what I'm going to do now, what you see on the screen is the link that is within the guidance that we've sent out in the OMH user guidance document. This is the link that you would use to access the children's designation application. So I am going to pull up the screen that providers would see once you access this. Okay. So once a provider clicks on the link, you will receive the following screen, and this is the login screen. And again, we note that because the application sits on the OMH portal, that is why you see at the top it says New York State Office of Mental Health. And this is the screen where the provider would enter in your OMH user ID and whatever password it is that you create. So what I'm entering in now is just a mock credential to access the application. Okay. So the second screen we see here is once you submit and enter your credentials, the following pop-up will show up on the screen. For those providers that maybe have applied through the adult designation process, this screen may look a little familiar to you. And we have three options. So for purposes of this designation process, the provider would click the last option, which is Children's Spa and HCBS Provider Designation Application, and then hit Continue. Okay. So what this brings the provider to is called our Guide tab. There's a lot of information in here, so I won't really go through everything, but I do, again, encourage folks to please read through it. It talks about New York State's objectives. It talks a little bit about the secondary process that we'll kind of touch on today in our presentation. And one thing that I do want to highlight is we have an application deadline date currently within the application that we're going to need to update. As of now, it states that our initial deadline date is February 1st, and we do want to update providers and let them know that that has been extended to April 1st. And the big reason for this extension was to give providers more time to make sure they understand the application, make sure they understand the questions, familiarize yourselves with it. Do not necessarily rush to submit. Take your time looking at it. And we're going to note that the state will not really be making any further reviews. Nothing will begin until after that April 1st date. So we just want to put that out there before we go into the application to just make sure you familiarize yourself and acclimate yourself to it. Scrolling down, we also have provided links within this Guide tab that will take the provider to resources if you need to enroll in Medicaid. There is a link here that will take you directly to eMedMe, which is where our enrollment forms for SPA and HCBS will sit. And there are also links to both of the manuals, which we reviewed earlier, but they are within the application as well. Another area that we're just going to highlight is that you'll notice when we go into the application that there are certain HCBS services that are not listed for designation. That is because there will not be a designation process for these services, and we've just specified what those services are within this guidance tab as well. So the second tab of the application is our agency information tab. And before I go into this, I just wanted to highlight some basic functions for providers to keep in mind as they're maneuvering through the application. At the very top, you see here in red that it states if 15 minutes elapses without clicking save, your session will end and any unsaved data will be lost. If for some reason you are beginning to fill out the application and you leave it up on your desk, just please make sure you hit save. We know it does take time for folks to enter all this information, so we certainly do not want you to lose any data that you're putting in. I will highlight that when we say hit save, at the bottom of the application there's an option to save changes. That is the function that you want to click on, not to save within your browser. So just make sure every time you're doing it, click save. If for some reason it's up more than 15 minutes, it will take you back to the login screen. So just want to make sure that no one loses any information. There is also an ability to print the application prior to filling it out. There's a lot of questions within the application, so if folks feel it would be beneficial to maybe see what questions are within the application and kind of review that prior to putting in information, there is a save print application at the end of the tab that I will review, and that gives you the ability to print a blank application and look at all the questions that we have here. So the very first box really asks for basic agency information, the name, the address, and a contact person in regards to this application. So really when we're talking about the contact person, when New York State does begin that review process, if there are any questions or ongoing communication that needs to happen with the agency, we're going to be looking to this information section here to see who it is that we should be reaching out to for that agency. And we've also included an option to list 2 people on the application in case for some reason the state cannot reach the primary contact person. Agencies will also be required to select the appropriate state agency that they are licensed, certified, or designated and or approved by. You do have the ability to select more than one state agency. Here on our testing application we have OMH. But if you were to select another agency, you may be required to also list additional information. For example, with OASIS, we have the legal name and provider ID here. Our next question is, we ask for the agency's Medicaid ID number. And just to highlight, when we're asking for the Medicaid ID number for purposes of this application, providers may have more than one Medicaid ID number, so really the Medicaid ID number that you should be entering here would be the Medicaid ID number that you'll be using for the SPA and or HCBS services. So this is the Medicaid ID number that you would essentially want the rates loaded to. And you should have an MPI number associated with that Medicaid ID number. If for some reason you do not, we do clarify on how, what the next steps are and how you're able to do that within our Medicaid enrollment webinar. So this, as we move down to the second box, this was the box that has the flagging function for our current 1915C waiver providers. So it does ask if the provider is currently authorized as a provider of any one of the 5 waivers. If the provider hits yes, then it goes into detail about selecting the appropriate waiver that they are under and selecting the services they are currently authorized to deliver under that waiver service. So again, this testing application has OMH, but if I click on the B2H waiver, you see all the services under that waiver. And if I click on Care at Home 1 and 2, you see all the services under that waiver. And the last box of this tab lists out all of our SPA and HCBS services that we are designating for. So in this section, the agency would select whatever services they intend on applying for, and you would hit Save Changes, and a prompt should show up stating that your information has been saved. Okay. So the third tab of the application looks at the agency's current qualification and experience. So again, we ask you to select the appropriate state agencies which you are licensed, certified, designated, and or approved by. This question is a little different from the initial question that we saw on the agency information tab. Once you do select the state agency that you were licensed, designated, certified, or approved by, it tells you to please select your provider type. So for OMH, for example, if I were to select this drop-down list, we have a drop-down of different provider types that the agency may select. If for some reason your provider type is not listed here, we do have another option to hit Other Provider Type, and that will give you the opportunity to type in what your provider type is and also explain how having this specific type and service experience contributes to meeting qualifications for this service. Okay. For question number 2, we do indicate that based on how you respond for your provider type, you may have to indicate primary or target populations of children and youth served. This would be an additional prompt only if the provider were to indicate that they were under one of the current 1915C waivers. So for example, if in question number 1, the provider indicated that they were under DOH and they were a care-at-home agency, or if within OCFS they indicated that they were a Bridges to Health provider, or for OMH indicated that they were an HCBS waiver or HCBS subcontracted waiver, they would have to indicate your primary target population. If you do not indicate those particular provider types, then this question number 2 would be blanked out. So I can kind of show you what that looks like. So for OMH, if I indicated that I was family peer support, I would not receive that question on population. Okay. Service information, we kind of look at how many years has the agency provided children-specific services. You have an opportunity to describe what those services are. And we also ask agencies if they are currently a provider of community first choice option or SPA services, and we do list that out as well. If you are not, you would simply select no and just move on to the next question. And looking at question number 7, we do also cover if the agency is requesting designation for a service to which they may not have direct related experience, they do have the opportunity to explain why they feel they may meet the qualifications for that services as well. Within the training section, with both our SPA and HCBS services, we really highlight the importance of trauma-informed care and cultural competency. So we do ask the agency to kind of speak to whether they currently provide training to staff in cultural awareness and competency as well as trauma-informed care. If you select yes, you have an opportunity again to explain what the current procedures are for training staff, how many times does that occur, what does that look like, and that's able to kind of help the New York State Review team assess the application further as well. And we also look at quality improvement, so just to get an idea on if the agency uses any metrics that are collected for analyzing outcome data, and this may include hospitalizations, ER visits, and discharges. And once the agency finishes this tab, again, you hit Save Changes, and you receive a prompt that your information's been saved, and you're able to move on. Okay. So the next tab that we're going to delve into is the Service Information tab. And essentially what this tab is at the very front of the application. I'll take us there. At this bottom end of this application on agency information, the agency selects all of the services that they intend on applying for. Once the agency selects these services, when you go into the Service Information tab, there is a tool at the very top of this tab called Service Navigation. What this is the drop-down only includes the services that the agency has requested designation in. So there's a correlation between what you select at the front end of the application and what shows up within this drop-down box here. For purposes of this testing application, these are the services that were selected, so these are the services that will show up in the drop-down box. All services have very specific service questions, so depending on the service, there may be different questions asked within this tab. The first service that we're looking at here is Community Psychiatric Supports and Treatment. And if we look at service questions, for every service we have a Likert scaling question that really looks at provider readiness and how the provider is feeling given the time that they're applying for the service on provision of the service. Are they feeling like they're not ready at all, but they're seeking designation as they're still undecided? Are they somewhat ready? They may be in an early planning phase and need to delve into what that structure may look like. Are they fairly ready, meaning you're interested, you're committed, and you have an implementation plan set up? Or are you moderately and totally ready? A structure may be in place and services should be ready within 60 days of go live, and you just need to finalize some details. So this is really just to gauge provider readiness. Again, it's within every single service. And if we go to a service that has some more questions, for example, looking at crisis intervention, you'll notice that there may be more questions under this service than there was under CPST. So, for example, for crisis intervention, we ask whether there's a triaging component that the agency may have in place, what's the current hours of operation, and whether the agency currently provides crisis services that are consistent with the SPA provider manual. So again, just highlighting the importance of making sure that you review those manuals prior to submitting this application. I also want to highlight that within this drop-down box, the application does not move automatically. So that means when you go to the very first service at the top and fill it out, you'd have to go back up to this drop-down list, select your second service, make sure you fill out all the questions, select your third service, fill out all the questions, and consistently hit Save Changes. If we do not highlight that, what may end up happening is that a provider may enter an application and certain services, questions specific to that services may be blank. So I just want to make sure everyone knows that you have to go back up into this toolbar here and just make sure that you maneuver through all those services that are listed. Okay. The last tab before the attestation statement is our site and staff information. So what this is looking at is it gives the provider an opportunity to list any site locations that they anticipate delivering these services out of. So we ask for site name, address, city, zip code, and we ask for counties served by this site as well. These are only counties served by the site that you're entering, so you have the ability to select as many counties as you need. And we also ask the provider to give an estimated number of children to be served after 6 months by the catchment area. And by the catchment area, again, we mean by the counties that you're listing above for this site location. If the provider is planning on applying for designation in HCBS, we do ask if the site location is consistent with the HCBS final rule. So for this question, we recognize that there are 2 components of compliance when it comes to final rule, which needs to be assessed, and that is compliance for services provided at this site location that you're entering here, and also compliance for services provided where the child resides. So for this particular question, it relates to that first component of whether services provided at this site location are consistent with the final rule, but we do recognize that there's a body of analysis that needs to be taken to verify that second piece of where the child resides, and that will be done through the review process. And with all of our services, again, they're intended to be community-based services, so we do give the agency an opportunity to describe plans for delivering the service outside of the site location. So whatever that is to the agency, they have the ability to kind of speak to that in this open text box here. And the agency will also have the opportunity to select the appropriate state agency which licenses, certifies, designates, or approves this particular site location. And again, once you select that state agency, it goes into detail about what provider type the site location is. And lastly, the agency will also have to select what services they plan on delivering at that site location. So you'll notice that every service that you selected for designation will appear here, and you'll only select the services that you intend on delivering at this site location. For every site location, there's a view and add staff function. So this is where the agency would click on entering information regarding their staffing structure for that site. But before I go into that, I do want to highlight that there are 2 questions on the bottom here that talks about the agency's target population and future populations that the agency intends to serve. So what this is looking at is we want to get an idea of what the primary target population is for the agency. Again, you're able to put this in an open text format. If you serve a certain age range, you are also able to specify that here. But really what we want providers to pay attention to is question number 2, who does the agency intend to serve in the future? If the agency indicates within this field any intentions on expanding to populations served other than their primary population, they may be subject to an additional licensure or authorization or certification requirement, and the agency will need to obtain this extra requirement prior to that final designation. So please keep in mind that when you're answering this question, if the agency does not intend on expanding to new populations, certainly specify that within this text box. And I'll also highlight here that if there is more than one site location, there is a function to add a new site location to the record. So for example, if in site location 1, the agency only wanted to deliver CPST and crisis intervention, you would select that here and then add another site to select the other services. Okay. So again, I just want to remind folks that for every site that you enter into the application, you'll be required to also report out on staffing information. So at the very top, it'll show what your site location is, and you'll outline your expected staffing levels for that site location within this grid here. This is just an example of what a response may look like. So when we ask for staff title, we're asking for the staff title of that is under the agency. So for example, if the agency has individual care coordinators, you would list that here. You would list what the staff qualifications are, meaning what is the license or degree that that staff person holds. And you would list the estimated amount of hours of that staff person. So for example, looking at this response, the agency listed individual care coordinators, both MSWs, and they listed 2, which would mean these are 2 full-time staff who work a total of 80 hours. Or looking at the second example, if the agency has a licensed practitioner, they listed the credential, which is the LMSW. This is 1 staff person who works a total of 40 hours a week. Now, the bottom questions here are open-ended questions, and this really looks at if there's any intent by the agency to hire additional staff, to relocate current staff to a position, to plans for staff training, and looking at anticipated timeframes for ramp-up. All these questions kind of ask the agency to speak to this a little bit. What we will say, given that, again, this process is still pending CMS approval, is that if an agency has intentions to add additional staff and to build upon staffing structure, you can certainly speak to that within this section of the application. However, we strongly advise agencies at this time to not hire additional staff at this moment. But again, you can certainly speak to that within the application process. Okay. Once the agency has completed all 5 tabs, the very last tab is our attestation tab. And this tab is the final piece of the application where the agency is really just signing off on the fact that they have understood the requirements for the state plan amendment services and or the HCBS services, and that they adhere to any standards and requirements that they are held to through the designation process and the review. We have the attestation statements split into 2 separate statements. One is for SPA and one is for HCBS. If, as an agency, you are applying for both sets of services, you will be required to sign off on both attestation statements. And the attestation statement would need sign-off by a CEO, and the CEO may put in their own contact information or delegate to a designee to enter in their contact information. Once the CEO signs off on the application, there is a checkbox right here at the bottom left just to confirm that you've completed the application and this is your final submission. Once the agency selects the checkbox, it does lock the application. So just make sure that you've thoroughly gone through it and you've reviewed your responses and you're comfortable with the way that you're going to submit it. A couple functions at the bottom. So we went through the Save Changes function. This is the function that I was talking about at the very beginning where you can print the entire application. If an agency signs on to the application at the very beginning, you can go to this tab and click on Print the Entire Application, and what this will do is it will print a blank copy so you can kind of get an idea of the questions within the application. Or you can print the entire application after you've filled it out and have a hard copy for your own reference. If the agency submits and they realize that there was an error made on the application or a mistake or an area that they may have forgotten to complete, you can request to unlock the application, and what this would do is it would notify administration that you are in need of going back into your application, so we would be able to unlock it for you and you would be able to get back in and complete it. And we also have an email administrator function, and this would send an email to our IT folks who have worked on the application in case you're experiencing any technical difficulties or issues maneuvering through the application. They would get a notification of this as well. I know we're running short on time, but I do want to go back to the guide and also just let providers know that at the very bottom of the guide there is also a contact mailbox for administrative staff here at the state, and what this mailbox does is it monitors any questions regarding the designation application or the designation review process in general. So please make sure to access that mailbox as needed and send any questions our way. Okay. I'm going to go back into the slides. All right, and we kind of went through this. You know, once you submit, so that checkbox that I was kind of hovering over, once you click that checkbox, this prompt will show up on the application that just asks you, are you sure that you want to submit, and no further changes will be allowed once you submit the application, and the provider would hit OK, and that would notify administration here on the state side that the application is complete. And the provider will then get a notification that their application will be sent to the state, and the state will review once that process starts in April or following April. Okay. So next steps, just to highlight really quickly, the designation application it does occur on a rolling basis. That April 1st deadline is really for the initial pool of applicants that want to apply, and again, I'm going to note that the state will not be doing anything between now and April, so again, we're just going to tell you guys, take your time, make sure you're comfortable, review it, there's no rush to submit right away, and providers will not be notified until after the April 1st date of anything regarding starting a review process. During the review process, once that does start, applicants may be contacted by the state via email or by phone. This is really for any clarification questions that we may need based on how the applicant responds in the application. Providers, again, may need to obtain an additional licensure authorization requirement, and this will be indicated by how you respond in the application. If you respond that you're planning on expanding to primary population served, then you may receive a letter just stating what the next steps may be. And providers and managed care organizations will be informed on when they can begin contract negotiations. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Meredith Ray-Labatt, and she's going to speak a little bit to the licensure certification and authorization requirements.
Thank you, Tiffany. Hi, everyone. I think Tiffany did a great job of really covering this issue a couple of times within the application. I just wanted to provide a little bit of clarity in regards to what we mean by this. The other licensure, certification, or authorization requirements only apply to the 6 new state plan services. They do not apply to the HCBS services. And so really what we're saying is that if you are, for example, for the general mental health population in regards to the Office of Mental Health providers, if you are not currently licensed by OMH, and you indicate in your application that you would like to expand your purview of who you're going to serve beyond who you serve today into the general mental health population, that you may be required to obtain additional authorization or licensure from the Office of Mental Health for serving the general population, mental health population of children with SED. The same would go for those providers not currently certified by the Office of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Services. If you are going to serve a broader general substance use population beyond who you serve today and you don't have OASIS certification, you may in fact need to obtain additional authorization or certification through the Office of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Services. So more information about what this licensure certification authorization will be is forthcoming, but just to notify some providers who have not yet really served general either mental health or substance use populations, there might be additional information that's required by both the Office of Mental Health and the Office of Substance Abuse Services. So I'm going to turn it now over to my colleague, Mimi Weber, from the Office of Children and Family Services to talk about voluntary foster care agencies.
Thanks, Meredith, and Happy New Year to everybody, and hope you're all staying warm. So just a quick note as it pertains, again, to any of the 6 new SPA services related to voluntary foster care agencies. Voluntary foster care agencies that are designated to provide any of the 6 new SPA services and serve children that are either in foster care or who have been discharged from foster care will not be subject to additional licensure requirements. However, voluntary foster care agencies that become designated to provide any of the new SPA services via licensed practitioners, emphasis on the licensed practitioners, will need to meet additional licensure requirements to contract with managed care plans to provide such services to children in foster care and out of foster care that are also enrolled in managed care. And many of you know that we're working through the corporate practice of medicine requirements and have proposals on the table in order to handle that situation. So required authorizations and regulations will be determined by OCFS and DOH in order to meet these additional licensure requirements. So the good news is we've identified a problem and we've identified a path to deal with the problem. And we're working through those paths right now. So stay tuned. As Tiffany and Meredith have already said, we're not expecting to receive any applications from any of you prior to April 1st. So this gives us time to work through those details and the implications associated with those details. So again, Happy New Year, and I'll turn it back over to Tiffany.
Okay. Thanks, Mimi. Okay, so lots of information today in today's webinar, but we quickly just want to go through a little bit about application support and questions. So again, as I highlighted before, any questions regarding the children's designation process, we do have a mailbox dedicated to fielding questions, so please contact us, let us know what your questions and concerns are. Again, highlighting if there's any difficulties with the technical maneuvering of the application, there's an email administrator's function within the application that will contact our IT folks. And we are collecting questions in our chat box today, but want to remind everyone that office hours will be this Wednesday, January 11th from 10 a.m. to 11, that should say a.m., for Q&A with state agencies. We don't want to be here until 11 So tune in to that. Hopefully we can take a look at some questions in the chat box function, and we can have some good discussion on Wednesday. So I'm going to turn it over to McTack to close us with a little bit about training and resources.
All right, thanks, Stephanie.
Good job. Good job.
So just to talk briefly about some of the training and resources that will be available to providers regarding the designation process, and then further training as the state transitions some of those services to SPA and home and community-based services. So we are expecting to do some training around, again, the designation process, becoming a Medicaid enrolled provider, as well as system transformation training around contracting, revenue cycle management, billing rules and rates, claims testing, and kind of the workflow. So lots of training to be forthcoming and more information to be provided regarding that. Also want to talk about that we recognize that there are different scenarios that providers, there are different scenarios for which apply to providers. I apologize, the slides are moving, but really just to kind of recognize that we will be addressing those scenarios and working with providers to really find out what's going to be the best kind of avenue for them to be ready for this transition. Also, if you want more information regarding managed care and all of and health home for children and information regarding that, here are some resources and information. And then lastly, again, some additional resources to stay informed. Please, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the Managed Care listserv, as well as the Department of Health Home listserv, where you can get stay up to date with the most pertinent and timely information. And again, if you have questions regarding that, there's also links to submit your questions to for Health Home and for Managed Care as well. And so again, just a reminder that we will be, thank you for your questions that you've provided today, that we will be taking those back, and we'll be answering those questions during our office hours webinar. And so again, thank you for joining us, and thank you to the presenters today. As Tiffany mentioned, there was a lot of information, so we hope you have time to digest that and then join us on Wednesday so that we can talk through some of the questions that you have here. And without further ado, I'd like to just end the webinar and thank you for attending.